All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started because we do have quite a bit of information to get through today. So, for those who do not know me, my name is Isabel McLean. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Virginia Housing Alliance. Welcome today to our webinar on the Virginia Housing Alliance 2026 legislative agenda ahead of the General Assembly here in Virginia. For those who may be new to Virginia Housing Alliance or new to being our members, we host a webinar such as this each year leading up to the General Assembly and as part of a general series to prepare our members, our advocates, our partners to engage in state level advocacy in the legislative session. This is the very first of the webinar series. So we want to give all of our members a chance to really understand and dive deep into the priorities that we will be advocating for in January. I hope this is not the first time that you have heard of these priorities. We really do our best to try to keep our members engaged and up to date on the things that we're working on. Many of these priorities we've also been working on for many years and continue to be big priorities for many advocates across the housing community and beyond in Virginia. But especially because you all are our close partners and members, we want to give you the chance to really dive deep into each of these issues, ask questions, give feedback, etc. So that's the purpose of today. Later on this week on Wednesday, we are hosting the second webinar in this series. I'll be going over State Advocacy 101, just kind of explaining, or maybe it's a 102. We'll see how much time we get into it, but really going over how the State General Assembly works, how bills are made at the here in the Capitol at the state level, and with a very specific focus on how to get involved. I won't be singing the I'm just a bill sitting on Capitol Hill, but I'll go over that a little bit, but then transition mainly to how advocates can track legislation, see what gets introduced, how they can get involved, how they can submit testimony, how they can come in person and see hearings, etc. What it's like to talk with the legislator, how to do that strategically, how to communicate the things you're looking for and translate what you all are experiencing into actionable talking points, etc. And then we will wrap up the series with a final session really close to our advocacy day that will remind everyone about the things that we talk about in this webinar and the one on Wednesday, but then with this very specific focus on the logistics and preparations for the actual advocacy day itself and what to expect, when to show up, what's our schedule, how do you engage, what you can do to prepare. We really do hope that you all do join us for our Housing Advocacy Day. It is scheduled for February 11th this coming year. Again, this is something we do every year to really provide an opportunity for folks across Virginia in the housing world, those with expertise on the ground for what Virginia needs when it comes to addressing our housing crisis, and give you an opportunity to share that expertise with those who are making decisions about our housing systems, specifically at the state level here in Virginia, and here specifically in Richmond. So I'll make sure at the end that I share a link to Advocacy Day if you haven't yet signed up for it. But I will also say that if you know of other folks who couldn't make it to this webinar today, or you know of other people that you'd like to come with you to Housing Advocacy Day who might miss this webinar or the one on Wednesday, all of this whole series will be recorded and shared with everyone who's registered for our Advocacy Day. This will be made available to all members so that you can really have as much information as you need to know what we're advocating for, what to talk about, and how to be a successful advocate come January. So I put in the chat for those who had hopped on right at 12 that I encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat. All of you all are members of Virginia Housing Alliance and part of our community. Would love to know who all is here and what perspectives you bring. Also, feel free to use the chat to ask questions throughout. I do have a lot of information to go over, so I won't really have time to stop at every single question or see everything that's posted in the chat, but there will be time at the end. I'll make sure for questions, and you all can come off mute and ask things or open up the discussion to other things that's on your mind. The purpose of this specifically is to talk about the legislative priorities that the Virginia Housing Alliance is taking the lead on advocacy for, that we have on our legislative agenda, that we are actively the ones taking responsibility for that advocacy. It doesn't mean we're the only ones advocating for it. And it also doesn't mean that these are the only things that we will be supporting, that we know about, that we have been involved in, or advocating for across the board. So I want to say that because there may be other bills, other priorities, other items that you have heard of that you feel very passionate about as well, or would like to know more information about. And there will be time at the end if you have anything like that in particular that you want to ask or talk about. I'd be happy to jump into it. But just know that these are the items, the ones that I'll be diving in today, that we are taking the lead on, that we have that responsibility for. So I may not be able to answer every question or know everything about another bill or budget item. But as a housing advocate, we do our best to support other priorities too and try to be at the table for all those discussions. So I may be able to answer that and would be happy to do that. You probably already found out when you jumped on here. Again, just for everyone who's potentially new, this is recorded. So I just want to let you know that. But I think I've made that clear, and I think those are all of my administrative notes. So anyways, thank you all again for coming. I'm very excited to talk about this with you all. All right, so let's jump in. Alrighty, so one of the absolute top priorities, just more generally, that the Virginia Housing Alliance is going to be advocating for this next legislative session is really informed by the very severe threats that we are facing federally to funding for permanent supportive housing and homeless services. Just in general, very specific threats to funding, or also threats just across the board with different proposals, narratives being put forth, etc. Things that may not be immediately on the table right now, or decisions that have been made, but the decisions have been proposed, etc. I don't have time today to get into all of the updates about changes at the federal level with regards to housing, but I will say that the Virginia Housing Alliance does engage in federal advocacy, and we do host a monthly federal impact call for the housing community for folks to come on and get updates about what's going on, what changes are happening, how that might impact Virginia. And if you'd like to be a part of those and you don't already receive invites for that, please let me know. You can put your name and your email in the chat, and I'll make sure you get added to that list so that you can stay in the loop. But more generally, there are some very severe threats, especially to permanent supportive housing when responding to homelessness. That are greatly informing how we believe that the state should respond to fill these gaps, to reduce the risk from these threats, and in order to keep our homeless service response system afloat, keep people housed, and to support what we know is the strongest solution to homelessness through decades of evidence and research to show that, which is permanent supportive housing, which combines both rental assistance and housing stability with wraparound supportive services over the long term until someone is able to be fully stabilized. I will say that the most immediate threat at the state level is to a program called the Continuum of Care program. That's the largest source of funding for homeless services at the federal level that we receive here in Virginia. And that would end up being a little bit about $42 million potentially that we're looking at as a pretty immediate shortfall. So I will say before I go into more detail about how we're responding in the long term, look for decisions that will be made in this General Assembly, we are also organizing an effort to try to have a more immediate response to fill that $42 million at least gap that we're seeing that could start affecting folks as early as January. And so if you're familiar with how the legislative system works, when we go to session in January, we're deciding things for the budget and programs and stuff that usually don't go into effect until July. And so there is also an organized effort, an outreach that we're going to be starting with both the current governor and the governor-elect to see if there are things that they can do to open up emergency funding for a very quick response and to coordinate that response so that we have time to then find long-term solutions and replacements to this funding for fiscal year 27, which would start in July. Again, come to our federal impact calls if you would like more information about that. The next one is actually tomorrow afternoon, so I can try to add you very quickly if you're not on that. All that to say, our long-term solutions are trying to find some replacement funding for that. That's going to be done in multiple different ways. And I will also just note here that while we're trying to hold on to what funding we do have, keep people housed that are currently supported by these programs, that are currently housed by these programs, we also recognize that the need for services like this is growing too. And so we don't want to just get back what we're losing, but also continue to expand and just really communicate how important funding for this solution is. And so one of the main ways that we're going to be doing that is by asking for an increase to the Housing Trust Fund. This is our state's largest source of state funding that goes into housing assistance. A large portion of it goes towards the development and preservation of actual affordable housing itself. But also a portion of it, about 20%, is administered in the form of homeless reduction grants. And these are flexible grants for homeless service providers and programs that most often goes towards permanent supportive housing. And so this type of program is the most one-to-one replacement for what we're looking at that we will be losing at the federal level, most likely. And so we'd really like to increase this as much as possible. We're asking for what we need, which is a total of $200 million a year, or $400 million over the biennium, which is quite a hefty ask. Currently, it's funded at $87.5 million a year. However, this is to really show the actual need that we have. I will say that just in general, it will be very difficult to make budget asks this year. We're going to be making them, but it's going to be very tough because there are several other shortfalls that the state is facing from federal funding, trying to replace shortfalls for SNAP, for food assistance, for Medicaid, changes to K through 12, like re-benchmarking for education, etc. And it's our job really to communicate that when you start listing those, housing has to be up top there, especially homelessness and permanent supportive housing. And so we're going to make that ask, but I just tell you all that that it is going to be tough. There's many needs that the legislators are looking at, and they've told us that it's going to be tough. We're still going to fight, but it's going to be tough. So we might not get that $400 million over the biennium, but the purpose for why we picked that number is because we really want at least an additional 20, maybe 25 million, specifically going to that portion for the homeless reduction grants, so we could start making progress to that loss of about 42 million that I mentioned earlier. Now, I will say that we have also had conversations about maybe evaluating the Housing Trust Fund with all stakeholders. We want to make sure that the decisions aren't made without those at the table that have used the Housing Trust Fund, that very much need it. But about maybe if we include an increase, there could be changes to that divide of that 80% towards development and preservation of actual affordable housing and 20% in the form of those homeless reduction grants. But I will say that no matter what we do, we also don't want that to come at any loss to the development funding, that if there's an increase, that we're not, robbing Peter to pay Paul, because we know that funding is needed across the board, whether it's developing affordable housing, because that is, in the long term, that's the solution to homelessness. We know that's what causes homelessness, is a lack of affordable housing, but also recognizing that we do have some immediate needs to help folks exit homelessness and have the support they need to eventually be able to live independently in affordable housing. So that just gave you that a little bit more detail there, just because this is evolving. And while, increasing the Housing Trust Fund is an evergreen priority for us, recognizing that this is our largest source of funding, but it is still so underfunded compared to the needs that we have. But it's a little bit more nuanced this year with recognition of these federal threats and how we can maximize how much goes towards permanent supportive housing, especially because it's so flexible and could be that replacement for us. I'll come back to that a little bit more later when we talk about housing supply. Another way that we're trying to address this issue is to put an additional $15 million a year in another pot that goes towards homeless services. So this is funding that is administered through our Department of Housing and Community Development under what's called the Virginia Homeless Solutions Program. This goes towards rapid rehousing, towards homeless prevention services and homeless assistance services. And this is just as important because the same threats that are going towards permanent supportive housing also include funding for rapid rehousing. and are funds that our homeless response system very much depends on for coordination of services, for capacity building to ensure that those services are going to those who need it the most. And so it's really important that we also have increased funding there. And I will say largely this pot of funding has remained stagnant for the past decade plus. We were able to get a little more than 500,000 additional in the past couple years, but that's it for almost 13 years. So as we know, the need for homeless services has increased significantly over these 13 years, and especially in in response to the changes we're seeing federally. I do also include in here that we've always fought for a portion of funding here to go towards capacity building and administrative supports. And this is especially necessary too with losses to federal funding and significant changes that take time and money to adapt to ensure that those who are providing these services actually have enough funding and support to do that well. So we'll be asking for that too. The last thing on this slide is another way that our state supports permanent supportive housing and housing stability. But these are two programs administered actually through our Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services, or DBHDS. They administer two really important programs. One that's called Permanent Supportive Housing, and it specifically provides rental assistance and services for adults with serious mental illness. So this does overlap a lot, and they do prioritize adults with serious mental illness who've experienced chronic homelessness, but it is not just only focused on that. There is also a big priority for adults exiting psychiatric hospitals or institutions, really trying to find ways for community-based care and community-based housing so that people with disabilities can live where they choose affordably with the services that they need. This is a really important program that has done a lot of good and has also been able to step up to try to provide some time and help transition folks from other programs that may be defunded or are facing these threats. However, it can't be a one-to-one replacement because not everyone who receives permanent supportive housing through homeless services directly could be eligible for this program. However, it's so important, and we absolutely need to continue to increase that to meet, at the very least, costs of living increases, so it can continue to serve as many folks as it is funded for, but also to be able to respond and buy time to some of these other cuts. Another program that they administer too is called the State Rental Assistance Program, or SRAP, and this program specifically only provides rental assistance, but for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But it's also very much paired with the Medicaid waiver for developmental disabilities with a DD waiver. So it provides the rental assistance, and then the waiver provides the services. So it's not as directly both of those things that the PSH program is, but it matches that. In the same way to ensure that people with disabilities can live in the community they choose with the services they need. So both of these programs need increases at the very least to keep up with cost of living, especially the SRAP program. We've actually lost vouchers over the past few years because funding has remained largely stagnant. And as we know, cost of living has absolutely not been stagnant. And so the amount of vouchers that we have funding for has decreased and will continue to do so if we do not have regular increases. So for each of these programs, we're asking for at least $5 million annually to them to do that. All right. Other priorities under the realm of housing stability for us. This has, again, been an ongoing priority for us that I hope you've heard about before. But it'll be the third year specifically of this campaign and this specific proposal. But we've been working really hard on establishing a state-funded rental assistance program that would fill the very large gap left behind by our federal rental assistance program, but also reduce very significant barriers to that program, and create our own program tailored to Virginia that reduces those barriers, introduces new pathways to assistance, and sets up greater coordination among many of our different services, agencies, and programs, especially with a focus on education. And so our specific proposal is called the 5,000 Families Pilot Program. This is a proposal for a pilot that would prioritize and specifically target low-income families with school-aged and younger children, really emphasizing the importance of housing stability to education. And as I said before, trying to create pathways that really work with the education sector to connect families to housing assistance that can really stabilize them over the long term. As I said, this is the third year we've been asking for it. We proposed it as a pilot. So because this is a budget year, we're proposing it to be 2 years so that we come back in a budget year to continue this. And there's more, that's just an easier time to make bigger decisions, bigger funding decisions. So it would be 2 years, and we've calculated that $60 million would be enough to serve 5,000 families across the state on average. However, I will say that our goal, just in general, is to try to get something started. I think, again, connecting this to federal issues that we've seen, there's been a lot of proposals and a lot of threats on the horizon, maybe not immediately right now, to our federal rental assistance program, whether that's the 43% cut that President Trump requested in his budget request in May. That's ultimately not on the table right now that we know of, but that conversations could continue, or the many proposed rule and eligibility changes that are out there that would make it much harder for families to continue to receive this assistance or receive it in general. And then just there's been conversations about moving the federal rental assistance program to the states to have them administer it instead of the federal government, with not a lot of notice or explanation about what that would mean. But because of all of that, all the more reason for our state to step up and create our own rental assistance program and build that structure to administer it so that we can respond to those federal threats. And just recognizing that the gap left behind in need is growing significantly, and we can no longer depend on the federal government necessarily to continue to do that. We'll still be fighting for that, absolutely, as well, but just recognizing those threats, it's really important that this is prioritized. Again, as I said before, this is a budget request in a really tough budget year at the state level when, out one side of the mouth, I'm talking about how the needs for the state to step up and with public investments is so much more critical now than it's ever been. And at the other side, I'm recognizing that I'm not the only person asking this of many different issues too. And unless there's going to be significant changes to revenue, which are being discussed too, there is a limited amount of money right now that the state has in its budget. And so we're going to be fighting for this, absolutely. But I will say that last year we were able to get $20 million to start this in the General Assembly budget before it was ultimately vetoed by Governor Youngkin. And while we were hoping with a new administration to be able to come to the table and get this passed, building off of that momentum, I do think it's still going to be a really tough ask, even with that momentum, because of this budget year. So we may not be able to get that 60 million, but that's what we are asking for because we know that that would be enough to serve 5,000 families and get something started. But again, we just really want to fight for this and really show that something needs to happen here. I will say we have a whole public campaign for the 5,000 Families program, and if you scan this QR code, you can get to our website on that. Because this is such a tough budget year, and because of all the changes federally, a lot of decisions about budget amendments have not been made yet. And so it's been a bit tough for me to put out regular updates about what we're doing here. But we will be updating that soon. So if you look to the website right now, we don't have updated materials yet or talking points. And I will be trying to update all of our partners on this soon. But it's just, that is where you would go to see those updates and become a part of that, part of that public campaign if you are not already. The last thing I'll mention here, and this is something that I guess I cheated a little bit, VHA is not taking the lead on, but we've recognized as a top priority and will be heavily supporting, is an act to also increase funding for the emergency rental assistance program that we have here. That's more that eviction prevention, that rental assistance available immediately when someone is facing an eviction and how to keep them in that home. And that is through the Virginia Eviction Reduction Program, or VERP. It's been funded at about $3.4 million for the past several years, and that leaves behind huge areas of the state that are not covered by this program, that don't have easy access to eviction prevention funding. And so some of our advocates our advocate partners are pushing for that to be funded at $10 million a year instead. So we are supporting that, recognizing that we need to come at it from every angle with more long-term housing stability through rental assistance as well as short-term emergency response assistance as well. Alrighty, moving on. I need to talk faster. Um, Now, this is something that this is a bill and a priority that is newer for Virginia Housing Alliance, and so I want to take a little bit of time to fully explain this. But we supported a bill that was introduced last year related to this, but we've worked now with the advocates that were behind that and tried to get more involved to support it coming back. This is an effort to push back on the growing trend and severity that we're seeing towards criminalization as a response to homelessness, knowing full well that punishment and criminal penalties absolutely does not at all address homelessness. In fact, it makes it so much worse. Not only does it make it so much worse for the people that are facing criminal charges when they can't even afford to find a home, but also it's more costly to the whole community. It's way more costly to respond to homelessness with incarceration, with emergency medical responses, with our healthcare system, letting people fall through the cracks until they're at the absolute biggest crisis of possible when it comes to their health, etc. It's so much more costly to do that than it is to provide permanent supportive housing and help people find a home with the solutions that we know work. And just in general, it really takes away a lot of dignity. We know that homelessness is not a choice. It's not something that can be punished. And so while we very much believe these things, again, looking at the larger context over the past couple of years, there have been efforts and decisions made at the federal level and our Supreme Court that have given localities greater freedom to respond with criminal and civil penalties to homelessness. Um, Previously, we had a very base sort of protection. They saw a Supreme Court case that said that localities, basically that it was cruel and unusual punishment for localities to criminalize someone for experiencing homelessness when they didn't have alternative access to shelter. And that was helpful. That was something. However, adequate shelter wasn't clearly defined, and there were a lot of issues still with how that would actually be implemented. Unfortunately, last year there was a Supreme Court case that even undid that base protection and said that actually doesn't matter. Access to shelter, it's not cruel and unusual punishment. Localities can do what they want. And since then, we've seen localities across the country pass ordinances that are anti public camping and trying to police the life-sustaining activities of people experiencing homelessness. We've seen that here in Virginia as well. And then we've also seen, so not only more ordinances, but also greater enforcement of existing ordinances that do this. And so now is really the time to respond back and really say that, people experiencing homelessness are not dangers in and of themselves. They need a place to engage in life-sustaining activities. And so what we have proposed is a bill that specifically states that says that no locality shall criminalize someone experiencing homelessness for engaging in life-sustaining activities such as sleeping, resting, seeking shelter in, etc., a public place, as long as they are not impeding access or creating a hazard to others trying to access that space as well. So it's really just reiterating that just as much as anyone else, people experiencing homelessness have a right to use public places. Just as much as I have a right to take a nap in a park bench, so does someone experiencing homelessness, or to take shelter there, or to find a way to exist safely. As long as they're not impeding access, the same access to other people, or creating a hazard to others, that they have that right. This is going to be couched specifically in the authority that localities have to pass very broad anti-loitering ordinances, which are arguably unconstitutional and have been used in ways to really police vulnerable people or Black and brown people for many, many years in our country, just in general. And so this is connected to that specifically with related to public places and sleeping, etc. But I want to just put that in that history to say that this is a larger effort towards decriminalization in general that can be used as a way to really police vulnerable Virginians. But this specific bill itself would be a huge step in that direction by giving people experiencing homelessness a public defense if they are charged with loitering, or they're facing an public camping ordinance or something, that they've received a criminal or civil penalty for this, so they can say, I was not interfering with access or creating a hazard towards others, and I have a right to use this public space. And so that's what this bill would do. We can talk more about it, and I'll say that the advocates that we're partnering with are going to be hosting a outreach webinar next week or the following after for advocates in this space and beyond who are interested in working with us to push this bill. So if you'd like a greater deep dive into this, and we can go over the language and what it means and our talking points for it, please put your name in the chat and let me know, and I'll make sure you get an invite. If you're a member, you're very likely going to get an invite anyways, but just to make sure, if you are interested and you want to be there, that you can get further information about this. Alrighty, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but in connection to our priority to increase the Housing Trust Fund, specifically to respond to threats to permanent supportive housing and homelessness, we also recognize that source of funds needs to increase always, because we have a huge shortage of just affordable housing in general. And so I do mention that here too, that a part of our request is also to increase supply too. And this here is a map of, oh, and I forgot to mention that on this other one too. We have a map on our website, two maps. This one is a map of ordinances that we know of in localities across Virginia that do criminalize homelessness. I will say this one pictured here is a little bit outdated. We have more ordinances on there, so keep an eye out and check our website if you were curious about where currently there are ordinances that do criminalize life-sustaining activities of homelessness. And then we also have on our website a map of affordable housing projects and developments across the state that have benefited from the Housing Trust Fund, to really show where the Housing Trust Fund has gone. And we're actually also about to update that too. We do an annual Housing Trust Fund impact report where we talk about all the projects that have been funded through it, really show pictures to really drive home, where are these dollars going? What do they make? What does the affordable housing look like? What are the homeless reduction grant programs like? How many people have they served? Where does this go? And as part of that is updating this map. So if you are curious and want more information, check out our website soon for those updates. The last priority section I have here is related to preservation of affordable housing and continuing to reduce the costs, the barriers to providing and maintaining affordable housing across Virginia. The top priority here is a bill that we've worked on as efforts for many, many years now. This is actually the third year that we're working on it. And this is to give Virginia another tool, because we don't have very many right now, but a very important tool to preserve what affordable housing we do have, recognizing that in order to make any sort of progress towards meeting our shortage of affordable housing, we have to hold on to what we do have too. And that without that plan in place, that's only going to set people up for serious displacement. And we know the negative impacts that can have on a community. And so it's super important that what housing we're creating, we're also have a plan to preserve it. And so this first bill would give localities a tool if they choose to use it, called a right of first refusal. Which basically means that they can interfere in the sale of a multifamily affordable housing project if it's at the end of its affordability restrictions, meaning that in the near future, it could be converted to market rate. The restrictions in place that came along with the funding that made that project possible are coming to an end, and there's no plan in place to replace them. If that is the case, a locality or a partner that they worked with, we've set it up where they could also transfer that right to a nonprofit, a for-profit partner, even a resident association as well, to match a third-party offer. And then if they do that, then the property would then be sold to them, have to be sold to them, and then would remain affordable. So it's a way to interfere kind of at a critical moment when other efforts to preserve the property have not come into play. They haven't gotten funding to continue. There's no plan to extend those restrictions. And here, this gives localities a tool to really intervene, especially for really priority properties, affordable housing in the areas that we need it absolutely the most, where without those restrictions, it would definitely become significantly more expensive, and the residents would be displaced. So this is a really, really important tool. We've worked with a delegate, Elizabeth Bennett Parker, for the past several years on this, and it's passed the past 2 years, but been vetoed by Governor Youngkin. And then I will say that it was a part of the Democratic caucus's day one priorities for this upcoming session. And so it's actually already been introduced as one of their day one priorities and is HB 4. So I've never worked on a bill that has such low of a number, which means it's such a top priority for leadership to be introduced so quickly and to be announced as one of those priorities. And it has also been mentioned as part of Governor-elect Spamberger's housing platform. So we are going into this session with a lot of hope that we do have a lot of support this time round to get this across the finish line, which would be really important. The next bill on here is something new that we haven't worked on in the past, but is responding to an issue that we've known for a long time is a problem here that many folks have tried to find solutions to. It's related to property taxes, but it's different than other things that we've worked on in the past if you paid attention to previous agendas. But right now in Virginia, localities do not feel that they have the authority to exempt or partially exempt affordable housing from property taxes. And the reason why is because despite the fact that our Constitution gives localities the ability to exempt properties that are used for, or exempt things that are used for charitable benevolent use. And then there's code that further clarifies that says localities can exempt property from property taxes that's owned by a nonprofit. You know, recognizing that a nonprofit is for charitable and benevolent use, and if they're using that property for that, the locality has that option. So there's all this intent to include, you know, at the very least, nonprofit owned affordable housing. However, anyone working in affordable housing knows that our main financing tool for affordable housing, the low-income housing tax credit, comes with it a very complicated ownership structure that is not as straightforward as you could say this is owned by a nonprofit, due to the fact that by including low-income housing tax credits, including investors have technical ownership over this project as well. And so it's complicated, and many localities have not felt, and you know, arguably so, that this type of housing is included under that owned by a nonprofit option. So we worked with lawyers this summer and this fall and have worked on this issue for a while now on trying to find a way to address this that wouldn't require a constitutional amendment. Now, I say that because our property taxes, a lot of that is dictated by our Constitution, and constitutional amendments take much more work to make happen than bills do. You have to pass that over two general assemblies with an election year in between, and it also has to pass in a public referendum on the ballot. So while we're not giving up on the idea of a constitutional amendment someday that would exempt all affordable housing regardless of ownership, recognizing that affordable housing is a charitable benevolent use, and that we would like that option there, we wanted to move the needle on something that we think was behind the current intent, but just needs a technical fix. And so our goal for this year is to add that technical fix to that code section about owned by a nonprofit to account for this ownership structure of affordable housing and make it clear that if a nonprofit has controlling interest, has that sort of power, even if it's not as straightforward as ownership, and how we've clearly defined that. I can get into more details if more people want to know, but giving localities that option. And many we've talked to are very excited about this. They've wanted to have this targeted tool, but didn't feel they had the authority for it. And so we're just working right now on getting as much feedback as we can from folks on if this works in practice. And so if you're interested and would like to give us feedback on this language, let me know and I can share it with you. We've talked to a lot of people and gotten a lot of really good feedback and a lot of good support, but this is newer, so wanting to make sure that we're getting this right. And I can go into more detail if you are curious. You can put your information in the chat and I'll check that and can send you that language or talk more about it. The last thing on here is something that we've supported for many years, and we've been unsure exactly what the strategy will be among the General Assembly for this year, if they're going to reintroduce it or not. I think they will, but it's an effort to allow all localities the authority to establish effective inclusionary zoning programs with the option to make them mandatory. But basically just having that authority to actually have these programs tailored to their own needs. Inclusionary zoning is a program that basically would either incentivize or mandate new development to include some sort of affordable piece to it, whether that's a certain number of affordable units, etc. And right now, the authority that the state gives to localities is given on kind of what they call a Christmas tree kind of code, where some localities have broad authority, just kind of across the board, they can do it however they want. And that's a very small number. And then the rest, they have further restrictions that are just very, very strict, overly prescribed about what localities can do. So much so that the other localities haven't found that they've been able to make programs that work for their jurisdictions based on those restrictions. And so there's been very clearly a problem for the past many years for all the rest of those localities to find a way to be able to use this tool if they choose to. It's just one tool of many. It's not going to solve everything when it comes to our need for affordable housing, but it is one important tool that they'd like at the table. And so we'd like there to be greater flexibility for all localities here. There's been bills that have passed but been vetoed by the governor the past couple of years, and we do believe that they will be coming back. So we'll be supporting that again. Alrighty, whew, good. We still have a little more than 15 minutes here at the end. I do just want to reference that some resources and ways for you to stay updated, because I hinted at this a little bit earlier, but I feel like especially this year our agenda has been developing and changing so much, even to this point right now, where it's hard to say exactly what our budget amendments will look like and what our patrons will be willing to introduce when it comes to the budget, especially with that fight, just knowing how much is at stake, and all the different shortfalls that we're facing here. And so I really encourage you to continue to check our website. This QR code would take you to our state policy priorities page on our website, where we update our legislative agenda. And that's also where we will put materials like talking points and one-pagers and fact sheets about our items as they're continue to be developed. I still have a very long to-do list for those materials, but they're in the works. But that's where you can go to find that if you're wanting to look for materials for different things to advocate for or to support our agenda. That will be posted there. So I really encourage you to continue to check back here. And then just in general, the General Assembly will start January 14th. But before then, we also will add more resources to our website to help you stay engaged. Namely, we do a bill tracker and a budget amendment tracker for housing-related items that will be available with specific, highlighting for what are our top priorities, but really anything related to housing that we're tracking, we put here on this website for anyone to be able to access and see. It'll show you, have links to more information about the bill, but also show you, what's its current status, who's patroning it, where it's at right now in consideration, etc. So I highly encourage you to check out that resource. We also, as I said before, will continue to post more materials on our website. We also have a link tree too, where we post our materials too. So website and a link tree. That link tree will also be linked on our website, as it always is. And then we do have our calls to action that if you're not already signed up for, I highly encourage you to. That's when we send out alerts that are strategically timed, when it's the best time for you to email your legislator for one of our priority items, that we really need that support to really show the quantity of support for this program, and really put that pressure on legislators. So we send out those alerts when it's really strategic to do that. That includes language and everything. So, if you don't have a lot of time, you can just press send, even though we always encourage folks to personalize a message. But that's there. And then we've been doing this for the past couple of years now, where we send out a weekly email updates to all members, all contacts that we have that are in member organizations, about our specific agenda. It's not an update on every single housing related thing, but just specifically the things on our agenda. And we'll continue to do that again this coming year. So if you are not already signed up for our policy alerts, here's a QR code to sign up, or update your contact information if you've realized you haven't really received one of those from us in a long time. I think the most recent one we sent out was like mid-November, or maybe it was right after Thanksgiving, I think. I can't remember. It was one for responding to federal changes to homelessness funding. So if you didn't receive that, it might be good to update your contact information or re-sign up. And then at the top here too, that's sign up for our general news. That's how we get information, contact information for those connected to our member organizations. So if you haven't received those weekly email updates in the past, or if you're new to your member organization or someone forwarded you the invite to come to this, register for this webinar or to our advocacy day, really encourage you to make sure that your information is in our system so you can receive that. And then lastly, I meant to put this link in the PowerPoint, but I forgot. But if you have not yet registered for Advocacy Day, here is that page. So February 11th, really encourage you to do that. Again, that's the purpose of these series, is to really make this advocacy accessible for you all so you can easily engage and share your expertise. All right, well, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. You have my email here. I can also put it in the chat if anyone wants to reach out to me about any other issues or questions or further information as I talked about. But now I'll take a chance to look through the chat and see any questions. Thank you all so much for introducing yourself. I really enjoy knowing, who all is here and what kind of perspectives people bring, and for other people to know as well. So. All right, great. So we have a question in the chat. Eric Hoffman, is there a resource that distinguishes homeless reduction grants and the homeless solution program? Yes, that I'm really glad you asked that, because that is going to be a priority. It's an important part of the messaging that we put around this. And I think I'm still, as you probably can tell, working out how best to really express the importance of this and our specific solutions in a concise way. I think that the need is so great and there's so many things we need to do that it's very hard to do that, but I want to make it really clear what our asks are and how they do different things, and why it's important that we're increasing the homeless reduction grants that goes towards permanent supportive housing, and we're also increasing the Virginia Homeless Solution Program, which covers rapid rehousing and homeless prevention services. It is confusing why our state has separate avenues for this. And I will say the main history for that is that the Virginia Homeless Solutions Program was created to align with federal funding that goes towards specifically rapid rehousing and homeless prevention services in general. And and that does not include the specific program that we're talking about losing, the Continuum of Care program. That has largely been used for permanent supportive housing and greater flexibility. And so while some parts of that do fund the same things as the Virginia Homeless Solutions Program, the Virginia Homeless Solutions Program doesn't cover everything that's being cut, namely the permanent supportive housing too. So we need both. But I agree that whatever materials that we make for this ask, which is in progress right now and will be updated on our website, we'll make that clear what those two funding sources are, why they're different, and why it's important that we're asking for both. So I really appreciate that question and suggestion. It's confusing, and I wish it wasn't confusing, but there's ways that we can resolve some of that confusion. All right, here, someone asked, so based on the recent NOFO, which is, for those who aren't familiar, that's related to the Continuum of Care program, and that's what is causing this huge shortage of over $42 million likely to Virginia. Permanent supportive housings are being slashed significantly, and the NOFO indicates all localities under COC must include law enforcement, enforcing no public camping, and also no harm reduction efforts. Are we going to push for representatives to review the NOFO to address the cuts and other requirements? Yes. So I hear you. At the same time as the NOFO is coming out and saying that they would reward extra points to applications who of projects that are in localities that have public camping bans that do really emphasize a law enforcement approach to homelessness, despite the fact that we know that absolutely does not work and how inhumane that is. I will acknowledge that the one of the reasons why we're looking at the fact that we will probably lose this funding is because there are so many requirements in there that are not only not based in evidence or have questionable legality, because that's also punishing projects or rewarding projects for things completely outside of their control. They don't pass what ordinances are in their locality or not. But beyond that, there is a transition away from all the solutions that we know that works, etc. So acknowledging all of that, I will say that many homeless service providers are going to try to do their best to get at least some of that funding. But we also recognize that there are so many hoops, so many changes, and also this NOFO was done so late in the game that it is very likely that we will lose that 42 million for the funding that goes towards permanent supportive housing, that goes towards this rental assistance as housing stability for families. And so we don't want to bow down to those demands. We want to recognize that we still should not have public camping bans. Our bill does not necessarily reverse those ordinances that are on the books. What it does is give people a public defense if those ordinances are enforced and do happen. And so in that way, it's not going to immediately impact someone's ability to get funding through the SNOFO, but I will say that that is a factor. So it's interesting that you're saying that. And I will also say that, connecting to what I mentioned a little bit earlier on, that we are doing everything we can to fight the SNOFO at both the federal level and the state level. And so we have a campaign that we've been working on now, and we'll be circulating a sign-on letter for organizations to the governor and to the governor-elect, asking them to pass an executive order that would make available emergency funding as soon as possible to replace this funding, to ensure these programs continue, and to reduce the need for such fundings that honestly have a very questionable legality, that when taken to court, even though that takes time, I think a lot of it will be proven that this is just not legal at all. But that takes time, and so we need to make sure that our programs continue, that our families that are served by these programs stay housed in the meantime. And so that's something we're heavily advocating for. But beyond that, doing everything we can to get pressure from the state, from localities, from our representatives and Congress on HUD to push back on this. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, Beth, but I guess the answer is yes, and we know how complicated it is, but we're going to continue to be advocating for what we need. Someone asked, you encourage us to meet with our district representatives and legislators in our home districts before Advocacy Day. Absolutely. As much as you have the capacity for reaching out to your legislators and talking to them about the needs for housing, or if you want to mention also the items on our agenda, I really encourage you to do that. The time is now. That's what I'm doing, meeting with many of them. I know many are super busy, but it's absolutely still worth making the ask. So while we have February 11th as the day that we're gathering everybody in person here in Richmond, that doesn't at all mean that advocacy before that or after that is not important. In fact, we'll be asking you to do that a lot through our policy alerts, and just anytime, through our weekly update emails too, will inform you to make more strategic or more informed asks as well. So absolutely important. And if you need resources about just housing education or how to meet with legislators and how to frame some of these asks, please come to our webinar on Wednesday. I'll talk a lot about what that looks like. And if you're trying to balance between, lobbying versus advocacy and just educating them about the need, or making actually specific legislative asks, you can balance that too. But I think it's absolutely important anytime, starting yesterday, to do that, if you can, and if you have the capacity. And my job is to try to make that easier for you. So we already do have a lot of materials around just housing education in general, and we'll be working very, very hard right now on trying to get the other materials done soon and available. All right, someone asked, has legislation looked at using land bank policies as a prospect for affordable housing land use to help for tax burdens to keep properties affordable? Yes, I will say that that is, we know that land banks do not have to pay property taxes on the land, and that's a huge benefit. I will say there are some barriers that or discussions I've been in about barriers to using land banks more, namely that there is the cap on the value of a property, that the land bank, I think, what is it, like $75,000 is the cap on how much that land is valued at for the land bank to automatically assume that land. So it's really, targeting like very depreciated, blighted property. And that doesn't really align with at all the cost of land now. And there's been conversations about doubling that or tripling that, recognizing that that's such a low cap. I know that's not the only barrier, and I know that there's a lot more that land banks do. And I'm not the land bank expert, but I will say that I've been in conversations about that, and I agree that there needs to be We need to use land banks a lot more, and that is a good tool. Recognizing how RDA is important now, but it could be used a lot more. So we definitely would support efforts to do that. We're not taking a lead on that, but I will say that I've been involved, both me and Brian are involved in helping to inform the housing committees on the transition teams for both Spamberger and Hashmi, so Lieutenant Governor-elect and Lieutenant Governor-elect. And I will say that this conversation specifically came up on the Housing Transition Committee for the Lieutenant Governor-elect. I believe it may have also been brought up too with Spambergers, but they're working on just a general like 4-year plan of recommendations for housing policy. And I think that this people are recognizing that that's something that needs to change, but I don't know of any specific bill for this session. We're almost here at the end, and I really appreciate people asking questions in the chat. If there's any other bill issues or questions you all have, I'll stay on a little bit longer too. We have 3 more minutes. Feel free to reach out to me too. I took down the slide, but here is my email. And we'll send out this recording and the slides I used to everyone who registered, as well as everyone who's registered for Advocacy Day. So keep an eye out for these resources if you want to refer back to anything. But does anyone have any other questions? Talked a lot, so go ahead, Eric. I saw you came off mute.
I was just going to say thank you. That's it.
Of course, thank you. I will give out a shout out to Eric. Eric's helped us a lot with the property tax abatement bill for localities. Has been incredibly helpful. So just want to thank you for a lot of that. I will just make it clear, all of these items that we're working on, we are not working on them alone. We're not making decisions alone. This is all very much a joint effort. For those on this call, for those who aren't, we never work alone in our powers and the people that we work with and our relationships. So. All right, well, I'll stay on, but if people need to head out, I understand. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and I will hopefully see you all at the very least at Advocacy Day, maybe at the webinar Wednesday. Looking forward to advocating with you all. Thank you.